Hi Booktube, Aaron here. I hope you're doing okay. Today I'm going to do a tag, and it's a tag I've been really looking forward to doing. It's the Victorian Literature Journey tag, and it's a great tag celebrating Victober, a month where we, on Booktube, where we focus on Victorian literature. It was created by Roz from Scallydangling About the Books and Tilly from Tilly's Shelf, and they took the prompts from the Shakespeare Journey tag, which was created by Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading, Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse, and Nicole from A Day of Small Things, while they were all co-hosting Shakespeare last month. So it was focused on Shakespeare. So the Shakespeare Journey tag has been turned into the Victorian Literature Journey tag. And in a way, it's a little more daunting because it's not focusing too much on one specific writer. I certainly found it a little harder, but it's a great period for literature and all sorts of things, really. It's a fascinating period. So I'm looking forward to giving it a go. I was very kindly tagged in this by Aaron from Aaron Read a Book, or Aaron Read a Book. So thank you very much, Aaron, for watching. I'll have his video and also the original videos and things like that down in the description. The first prompt is, what was your first experience reading Victorian literature and how was it? And I honestly can't remember. There was a lot of it around. I was just watching Mark from Book Time with Elvis, and he said a very similar kind of thing. So I probably heard bits of Dickens. We certainly watched adaptations of Dickens when we were growing up. What else was there? There was Sherlock Holmes. I'm fairly certain my dad read us Sherlock Holmes stories when we were little. I'm trying to remember if Kenneth Grahame is Victorian. I feel like he's sort of more Edwardian, if I'm remembering correctly, and so he doesn't quite count. But yeah, there are some of the things I can sort of remember being around. And I can remember having a copy of A Christmas Carol, and I'm 97.8% sure maybe that I read that. But I can't really remember. The same goes for the Jungle Books by Rudyard Kipling. I can remember the edition that I used to have of that, but I can't remember how far I got or if I finished it. And I also can remember borrowing a bind-up of some books by H. Rider Haggard. So I've got my books all out of order here. So one of them in here would have been King Solomon's Mines. This is the only Haggard I've got at the moment. It also had She and the Adventures of Alan Quatermain in there as well, I think. And I can't remember which of those I read and if I ever finished any of them, but I can remember poring over it and there were great illustrations in there and it seemed like a lot of fun. So it was kind of around, it was a period of literature that I was quite aware of and quite comfortable with. But I can't really remember the first thing I read. The second prompt, has reading a Victorian book ever brought you to tears? And so far, this isn't the case, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so far I haven't cried when reading a Victorian book. Number 3, are there any people who have played a significant role in your Victorian literature journey? And there are a few people I could say, but I think particularly my sister, even if there's a bit of rivalry there, she really loves the Brontes. So for me, I really like them, and whenever I'm reading a Bronte novel, it feels like home. There's something to it that, I just have a deep affinity for it, but it's kind of times 1,000 for my sister. She's a bit Bronte obsessed, and she might have mellowed down a little bit, but definitely when we were teenagers, she was a massive Bronte fan. And and sometimes we didn't want to step on each other's toes. So if she really liked something, I might not spend as much time in it, but we also might recognize that, the things each of us like are pretty cool, so we might wade in a little bit. And so definitely my first time reading Jane Eyre was sort of inspired by her and by just hearing her talk about it and kind of infused about it. Yeah, our love of the Victorian period is definitely shared. So my sister is definitely someone who's played a very significant role in my Victorian literature journey. Number 4, do you have a favourite film or TV adaptation of a Victorian book? Or what about one that you'd like to see made? Two adaptations I really like. There's the BBC series of Bleak House. So I got the tie-in cover. I really, really enjoyed that. That was sort of my introduction to Bleak House. I saw that years later, then I read the book, and then I rewatched the TV show. So I really, really like that. And relatively recently, in about 2017, 2018, there was a BBC miniseries of The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, which again I really enjoyed, and I loved the atmosphere of that book. So that's another one I really like. One I'd like to see made. This is one that has already been adapted, but I've just never really liked. I've never been convinced by an adaptation of this book, and that's Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. And they always feel like they're missing something and feel a little lackluster compared to the book. So far I haven't been convinced by an adaptation of Wuthering Heights. Number 5, which character in Victorian literature most resembles you or you most identify with? And I've come about this in a little of a roundabout way. This is really a character I just enjoy spending time with. I'd quite like to be friends with, and that's Gabriel Oak from Far From Madding Crowd. And recently I just randomly picked this book up and just read the first page where we're introduced to Gabriel Oak, and I don't know, there's just something about him, and when I read the beginning of this book, I mean, it gets quite sad for him quite quickly, but just something of his character and his facial expressions, it just feels like meeting an old friend when I read it. So it goes, when Farmer Oak smiled, the corners of his mouth spread till they were within an unimportant distance of his ears. His eyes were reduced to chinks, and diverging wrinkles appeared round them, extending upon his countenance like the rays in a rudimentary sketch of the rising sun. His Christian name was Gabriel, and on working days he was a young man of sound judgment, easy motions, proper dress, and general good character. On Sundays he was a man of misty views, rather given to postponing, and hampered by his best clothes and umbrella. Upon the whole, one who felt himself to occupy morally the vast middle space of Laodicean neutrality which lay between the common people of the parish and the drunken section. And yeah, it kind of goes on, but he's just a very amiable, likeable person, and he's certainly a good person to know if you have any sick sheep. So yeah, I'd say I'd quite like to be friends with Gabriel, and I think if a lot of us are honest, we would quite like to be a little more like our friends. Then next up, number 6. Do you have a favourite moment, line or scene from Victorian literature? Tell us about it or read it to us. I thought I'd go with a poem for this because I haven't really talked about any Victorian poetry yet, and I haven't read nearly as much Victorian poetry as I'd like. And often we think of Victorian poetry as being a little proper and buttoned up and quite dusty maybe. And I think maybe generally a lot of people might think of the Victorians across the board as being quite buttoned up and reserved, which in some ways they were, but I think this is one of those poems that it kind of shows you that they could be very, very vulnerable, and that they still felt a lot, and they weren't really afraid to show it. They just might show it in slightly different ways to us. So this is Gerard Manley Hopkins. I also just love the way his poems sound as well. And this is Carrion Comfort. I'll not carrion comfort, despair, not feast on thee, not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me, or most weary cry, I can no more. I can something, hope, wish day come, not choose not to be. But oh thou terrible, why wouldst thou rude on me thy ring whirled right foot rock? Lay a lion limb against me, scan with darksome devouring eyes my bruised bones, and fan, oh in turns of tempest, me heaped there, me frantic to avoid thee and flee. Why? That my chaff might fly, my grain lie sheer and clear. Nay, in all that toil, that coil, since seems I kissed the rod, hand rather, my heart low, lapped strength, stole joy, would laugh, cheer. Cheer whom, though? The hero whose heaven handling flung me, foot trod me, or me that fought him? Oh, which one? Is it each one? That night, that year of now done darkness, I wretch lay wrestling with my God, my God. So that's a bit of Hopkins. I just love the way his poetry sounds, and you kind of trip through it because it's so compressed, but it shows a lot of what I love in a lot of the poetry before and after him. And he's laying bare a very vulnerable moment, and I really, really, really appreciate that. Number 7, does any Victorian literature intimidate you? Sticking with some of the poetry, Alfred Lord Tennyson certainly intimidates me a bit, mainly because of how much he's written. Although I also kind of underestimate him a bit, or maybe just kind of forget about him. And then I come back to him and actually see that he's really, really good, and that I should read more, but then there's so much to read. I've got this lovely edition. It's got tons of illustrations in there from Millay, Rossetti, and some other folks. And I really should spend some more time with Tennyson, but I haven't. And the same goes for Trollope. I've read one book by Trollope so far, and that was Sir Harry Hotspur of Humblethwaite, which I kind of get the impression is a bit of a sort of minor work, and it was okay. It sort of reminded me of Jane Austen, but not quite as good. But I've listened to people reading Trollope and enjoyed it. Steve Donoghue recently read Barchester Towers, and I really enjoyed following that. And I've listened to bits of Phineas Finn, which is one of the Palliser novels. And so I've got quite a few of them. This is Can You Forgive Her? And this is the first of those novels, I believe. And I've been meaning to make my way through this and then the rest of them, but just haven't. I think I'm always intimidated by long series and by authors who have just written lots and lots and lots. I'm also quite intimidated by George Eliot as well, but we'll save that for another time. Number 8. What tips would you give someone early on in their Victorian literature journey? I think one would be, I mean, there are lots of big names and lots of really big books, and you might feel like you need to tackle them. But there's lots of really good short stuff. So there's Robert Louis Stevenson. So this is the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And it's got some other short stories in here, and there are loads of other great Victorian short story writers. You know, there's Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I'm doing that thing where I try to say about 3 words at once. It's not going very well. I'll blame Gerard Manley Hopkins. But yeah, the Sherlock Holmes stories are great as well. And H.G. Wells, so The Time Machine is less than 100 pages, and it's action-packed, it's interesting, it'll get you thinking about the Victorians and what they thought, and about us now as well, and maybe where we're heading. So yeah, there's plenty of shorter things for you to enjoy. I think as well, when it comes to just tackling the prose itself, you might expect it to be quite dusty and archaic. I'm always surprised that the Victorians often come across as very modern and very fresh, quite readable when it comes to just the sort of line by line, the word choice and things like that. And maybe the main thing you'll have to you might struggle with is just the pace. And on the whole, Victorians tend to just spend a little more time getting to the point. And I think we just have to change gears a little bit, which is by no means a bad thing. I think it's quite a good thing to just change pace every now and then. And I think once you sink deep enough into a Victorian novel, there's no getting out really a lot of the time. So yeah, I'd say that try some shorter things, but also you might be surprised at how fresh just the prose, the language feels to you. Number 9, what is your top recommended read for other readers of Victorian literature? So I think I would, if you're used to Victorian literature, I would definitely recommend Thomas Hardy. He's one of my favourite all-time writers. I love Jude the Obscure. I almost chose this, but it is a bit depressing, even though I find it quite life-affirming as well. And so I probably would recommend Far From the Madding Crowd if you haven't read it yet. I think it's just a great book. It's got a great atmosphere. He he often goes on, with the scenery, but I really love that, so I don't mind that at all. And that's it. There's just the last prompt, which is to tag people. So I will tag Anne Novella. I'm currently reading doing a buddy read with Anne Novella at the moment. So I'll tag her. She may have some interesting views and some maybe contrary opinions or some different perspectives. So that would be interesting. I'd quite like to, if he's able, I'd quite like to see Sean D. Standfast do this. I know with sort of time and energy and stuff, you might not be able to, Sean, but if you can, it'd be cool to hear what you think. I'd like to tag Sylvia from Woods, Books and Building. So a relatively new channel to me, and a relatively new booktube channel as well. So I'll tag Sylvia. I'll tag Courtney from Courtney Reads. I feel like Courtney's read a fair few Victorian novels and will have some things to say. And I'll tag Jason from the channel of The Disappointed Man. I'd quite like to see what he'd have to say. And I'll also tag David Novak from David Novak Reads Poetry. And yeah, I'll see what David has to say as well. And for any of you watching, if you'd like to do it, please consider yourself tagged. And I reckon if you're not really much of a reader of Victorian literature, but you'd like to give the tag a go, I would encourage you to think about inverting some of the questions for someone who hasn't really read much Victorian literature, maybe exploring why you haven't read much. So I'll throw that out there if you'd like to. But I'll leave it there. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.